Talking now in the next few minutes about a very serious issue. I don't think a lot of Americans, in fact, know that April 24th today is known as National Day of Remembrance of Man's Inhumanity to Man. And this date was declared in remembrance of when the Ottoman Empire, in fact, rounded up some 250 Armenian intellectuals and eventually executed them back in 1915. That was the beginning of what became a big, huge genocide that was known as, and is known as, the first genocide of the 20th century. 1.5 million people of Armenian ancestry were eventually killed by the Turkish Empire. Now the effort is to try to get this genocide to be officially recognized in places like the United States. And it wouldn't seem to be a question since so much evidence is there, but because of relations that, for instance, the United States government has with the Turkish government, there has been a resistance to using what some call the G word, the genocide word. In fact, President Bush and other presidents, including Bill Clinton, have been really not wanting to use that word at all because of fear of upsetting the Turkish government. So joining us to talk about the recognition of Armenian genocide, Congressman George Radonovich, who is the representative in our area in Fresno, and we appreciate him joining us this morning. Thank you for being with us, Congressman.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Also on the line, David Barsamian, host of the internationally known and nationally syndicated Alternative Radio. David, nice to have you with us again.
Bari Luis, good morning, as they say in Armenian.
Thank you for that. And also Barlo Dermurdichian, who is a professor of Armenian studies at Fresno State. Barlo, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I would like one of you, and maybe it should be you, Barlo, since you're a professor on this topic, to explain to listeners about this genocide beyond what I sort of offered in the setup. What exactly happened, and why were 1.5 million people of Armenian ancestry killed back in 1915?
Well, the area that the Armenians lived in was the historic homeland of the Armenians, and over time, various empires had conquered the area where Armenians lived. So about 2 million Armenians lived in the Ottoman Turkish Empire in 1914, 1915, and about 1.5 million lived in the Russian Empire at the same time. Now, during the outbreak of World War I, the Ottoman Turkish government was under the leadership of a small group called the Committee of Union and Progress, whose idea was to expand their empire and also to, in a sense, ethnically cleanse those people within the empire that were not Turkish or Muslim or following the Turkish customs or language. And the biggest target was the Armenian people. And so beginning in 1915 and for the next 7 to 8 years, the Turkish government campaign was to eliminate, deport, and kill the Armenian population.
And so some were put into basically the equivalent of concentration camps to be deported or to remove from the country and ended up dying through that process. Are we talking about the kind of eradication of being put in ovens and, what we know about the Nazis and the Jews? What are we talking about?
It's similar to that in many ways. The main method of eliminating the Armenians was through forced marches that led to concentration camps which were set up in the deserts of Syria. So the ultimate, the end process was to put people into concentration camps where they died of starvation if they survived the initial walk or march, which often took months. So that was the main way that people were killed.
Congressman George Radonovich, I was handed a full-page ad in the New York Times from yesterday where the Turkish embassy, in fact, has requested, and I'll just read a little bit of it, let's unearth the truth about what happened in 1915 together. Turkey invites Armenia to study historical facts jointly. To this end, Turkey proposed to Armenia the establishment of a joint commission of historians which will be open to third parties. Turkey ensures full access to all its archives. So in spite of what our good professor is telling us, Turkey seems to be saying that we're not getting the full picture. What's happening? Why is this such a hot political issue?
Well, it is because 1.5 million people were massacred at the beginning of the last century, and a lot of people feel, and even Hitler used the comment that when he was contemplating exterminating 8 million Jews, the question came up about how civilization would react. His comment was, well, nobody cared about the Armenians.
Right.
And so it's important, I think, at every step in our history to recognize genocide where it is, because it provides less tolerance of it in the world as we deal with it in today in places like Darfur. There is the United States position has been not to recognize the genocide, that through the State Department, the administration, both Democrat and Republican, have viewed their way of solving this genocide issue is to encourage and constantly encourage the country of Turkey to recognize it on their own rather than the United States recognize it as a means of ameliorating some of the issue. And so the Turkish invitation to let's sit down and kind of walk through this thing is out there, but there's not a lot of confidence that this type of process will lead to the recognition of this tragedy as a genocide. So that effort is going on, but at the same time, many of us believe that Turkey will never come to this conclusion unless countries like the United States, and there are other countries that have recognized the genocide, do it on their own, and in order to provide Turkey the incentive to actually come to the point where they will recognize it as a genocide and get this issue behind them.
David Barsamian, host of Alternative Radio, it seems from what I read that one of the reasons the Turkish people and government are resistant to acknowledging this, if that's fair to say that, is that this genocide happened during a time when their most revered leader was in charge of things, and it's practically and it is actually, I think, against the law in Turkey to speak ill of this leader.
Well, you're referring to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. That's not historically correct. He was not in charge of the Turkish government in 1915. That would have been Enver Pasha and Talat Pasha of the Committee of Union and Progress that the professor mentioned a bit earlier. Kemal Mustafa Pasha became leader of the Turkish Republic in 1923. A couple of things I want to say. One is that my mother was on one of those death marches from north of Diyarbakir, the historical Armenian city of Dikranagert. She lost most of the members of her family, including 4 brothers and both of her parents, in this death march. So I have it's very close to me and to my family. The Turkish government at the time used the kinds of euphemisms that have become all too familiar. The Armenians were going to be resettled. They were going to be relocated to some unknown destination. And denial continues, and it's the final stage of genocide. It prevents closure, and justice is denied to the victims and to their descendants. The Turkish ambassador to the United Nations just a couple of days ago in the New York Times rehearsed the same litany that successive Turkish governments have been reciting since the genocide occurred. In fact, he says there is no explanation as to how and why these sad events took place in eastern Anatolia. Those tragic events took place in time of war, and both populations suffered extensively. And you mentioned the full-page ad in the New York Times yesterday, taken out by the Turkish embassy. It talks about getting historians together and studying the truth. Well, there's one historian that will not be invited by Turkey. In fact, he's facing criminal prosecution, and that is Taner Akçam, a brilliant Turkish historian. That's AKCAM. He has a new book out called A Shameful Act, in which he has had access not only to the Turkish archives, but because he's multilingual, he's able to read the German and Austrian archives. Remember that Germany and Austria were allies with Turkey during World War I. And Akçam, I believe, has written the definitive book on the topic, and clearly he has found overwhelming documentation and evidence that proves that it was a state-organized, premeditated genocide. This has been established beyond any reasonable doubt. And the fact that this continues, this charade on this hand, on the other hand, and that the Turkish ambassador could use the passive voice in such a cynical way, you know, a tragedy occurred, people were killed. Well, where is the agency there? Who killed these people? How did they die? Who is responsible? All of those things are, of course, elided and obscured by this kind of doublespeak.
Barlo Mugerdichian, who, again, professor of Armenian Studies at Fresno State. I apologize for my factual inaccuracy. I hate that, but I think what I was referring to is something I read in an LA Times article on this issue, and it says, for Turks, the genocide is taboo for a host of reasons, but perhaps the most important is that it occurred at a time of the founding of modern Turkey under Kemal Atatürk, a man so sainted that insulting his memory is still punishable by jail. So the battle continues year after year. So criticizing the government within Turkey or recognizing this seemingly is still a very serious problem, and serious consequences are involved for anyone who does. Can you speak about that?
Well, yes. There's an article in the Turkish Penal Code, Article 301, which is the one that you're referring to, which is considering insulting Turkishness to be a crime. And under those articles, some Turkish citizens, including Taner Akçam and Elif Shafak and several others, Orhan Pamuk, who was the recent Nobel Prize winner, they were all accused of breaking that law by insulting Turkishness.
And Hrant Dink, who was murdered.
Yes.
Yes. So the problem is for Turkey that the whole basis for what is today Turkey is based on really the genocide. That is, they had to eliminate all minorities in order to come up with the myth that today Turkey is a nation that is based only on Turkish culture and Turkish history. So if you begin to expose the genocide, you begin to threaten the very, the insecurities of the Turkish government.
Congressman George Radonovich of Fresno, why is the U.S., who certainly has taken on many governments that it had disagreements with before, so concerned about not upsetting the Turkish government? Is it because of its strategic military location, you think?
Exactly. It's a strategic ally in that part of the world. We don't have a lot of them in what would be considered Muslim states or countries. And we have a base in the northern part of Turkey called Incirlik that was valuable, at least most of the time, for the problems the United States have had with Iraq over a period of time and in the no-fly zones and such prior to the Iraq War. And in that part of the world, a lot of people think, and I don't believe this, but a lot of people think that something like this might tip what is viewed to be a country precariously balanced between the West and the East, and tip it more toward the East and detract from the American influence in that part of the world. And that's the excuse that the State Department will use to say that the United States should not recognize the genocide. Now, I hold a different view. I mean, I think that at the same time, Turkey is trying to become a member of the European Union, and they're being put off because of these types of things. You can't criticize a former ruler of your country, otherwise you'd be sent to jail. They've assassinated people, not the state, but in the country, people that have been critical of Turkey's involvement in the genocide have been assassinated recently in the country. And so on one hand, the State Department, the United States officially, is worried about what they view as strategic relationship with an ally in that part of the world. At the same time, everybody's encouraging Turkey to come out as demonstrated by their desire to be a part of the European Union. But part of that is recognizing, part of your history. And this was not the current country of Turkey that committed these atrocities. This was the old Ottoman Empire, and in many ways, it would be a very simple thing for them to do. But instead they try to deny it really was anything, and that just does them a disservice in the long run.
And some have said, in fact, it connects them even more to that. In fact, rather than distancing themselves from it, the more they refuse to acknowledge the history, the more they sort of connect themselves with it, the current government. So, David Barsamian, I want to ask both what you would like to see happen in terms of turning the U.S. attitude around this recognition of the genocide around. And I wonder also if you can quickly maybe share an experience that your mother explained to you about what she remembers about the genocide.
Well, that's in a program that I just produced, and people can get more information about it at alternativeradio.org, okay. Alternativeradio.org. She spoke to a history class here at the University of Colorado at Denver just a few months before her death. And she described how her father was murdered in the village before they left. In general, the young men and middle-aged men were picked up, rounded up, and murdered en masse. And the women and children were sent on these death marches. Along the way, as she describes in her testimony, the kind of Einsatzgruppen, death squads would be raiding the parties, kidnapping, raping the women, killing people randomly, stealing their things. It makes for a very heartbreaking story, and there's barely an Armenian in the United States. The population here is about 1 million. Some of them are the congressman's constituents who have not been touched by what happened in that period between 1915 and 1922-23. So it's very important that justice in this issue be resolved, that there is not just recognition, but there is some kind of compensation, a la what the Germans did after World War II to Israel, that there be a clean break from the past. And the United States has tremendous leverage over Turkey. I don't know why the government is so timid. They give billions of dollars in military and economic aid to Turkey. It's not the other way around. The base that the congressman mentioned, incidentally, is in a historic Armenian area called Adana in southeastern Turkey. And in fact, when I was in Beirut last year, I met an Armenian whose family had escaped from Adana, who had title deeds to that particular property.
Wow.
So there they are. I mean, the U.S. base is sitting on, Armenian land, literally, in this one case.
Right.
So it's very important that the truth come out.
Thanks to our guest, Congressman George Radonovich Barlow Der Mordician, Professor of Armenian Studies at Fresno State, and David Barsamian. Check him out, alternativeradio.org. Thank you all very much.